Welcome to Hardlines Media, Episode 4, June 24th, 2017. This week's breaking news includes California Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon holding the Medicare for All bill in committee indefinitely, effectively killing the bill, an update regarding Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods and updates to the Grenfell Tower fire in the UK, and more rounds of United Auto Worker layoffs, this time in Kansas City. Today we have two call-in guests. First we have Illinois State Senator Heather Steans speaking about the state of Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353, efforts to legalize and regulate cannabis in the state of Illinois. Our second call-in guest is Christopher Black, retired international criminal defense lawyer, most well known for his legal work in Yugoslavia and Rwanda in the 90s. We discuss current U.S. military action in the Middle East, the Baltic states, and the South China Sea. This week we cover in-depth the reasoning and ramifications behind Chicago's own Epic Burger no longer accepting cash in their restaurants. Please enjoy Hardlines Media Episode 4, June 24th, 2017.
Good morning and welcome to Hardlines Media Radio here on Q4 Radio, 1680 AM in Chicago. I'm Lainey Peterson and I'm joined today by my co-hosts Kit Cabello, Paul DuPont, Daniel Lipker, and Fernando Tirado. As always, we have an incredibly full show today. We'll be joined by Illinois State Senator Heather Steans and an international criminal lawyer, Christopher Black. They'll both be joining us by phone. We'll also be following up on some stories, including Amazon's potential acquisition of Whole Foods, as well as the aftermath of the massive building fire in the United Kingdom. Later on in the show, we'll also have an in-depth discussion about Epic Burger's decision to stop accepting cash for payment at its stores. So let's get started. Okay, big news just came in. California's been looking at getting single-payer health care, but it's been blocked by one of their Democrats. What's going on with this, guys?
This came out of nowhere for a lot of people, myself included. This seemed like California was on the road to be the first single-payer state in the union, and it just didn't. It seems like it didn't turn out. We had Paul. You have the article in front of you. What's it say?
Yeah. So California Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon announced on Friday that he has decided SB 562 will remain in the Assembly Rules Committee until further notice, basically tabling it for, it looks like, about a year, citing claims that the bill was not well written and there were some problems with it and it wouldn't work. And so he feels that the best solution to that is to just not talk about it.
Yeah, why? Like you said earlier, why fix it when you can just not fix it?
That's the thing that's going on. And what really gets people upset about this is what a lot of, democratically aligned voters are calling for. This is what we want. We want to move. We're faced with the American Health Care Act, Trump Care, which is, in short, make poor people pay more for less. And we're saying, no, we need health care. That law would, if in effect, condemn people to die for not having enough money. And we want a system by which we can negotiate in a single-payer way that helps drive down medical costs and provide this to everyone. And that's the kind of thing that a lot of established politicians, Democrat and Republican, don't want because they receive large sums of money in campaign contributions from the pharmaceutical industry, from medical device manufacturers, and from insurance companies. So this would be antithetical to the goal of, creating scarcity where none need exist so that people can extract money from it.
Yeah, no, everything you said completely with. It's just very interesting because California, a lot of people in California wanted this to pass. So what I'm going to be interested to look for is the backlash that occurs from this bill because, California has a lot of very strong Democratic groups, a lot of strong progressive groups, and they will not be happy at all that all the work that they've put into. Me and Kit have gone through making a SGR 42, and that was a much smaller bill than what this is, and can imagine the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours these people have dedicated. This is going to be very interesting to see the full reaction and backlash to this act.
One thing that always distresses me about the discussions about health care is you'll hear people say, well, why should I be paying for somebody else's health care through my taxes, or why should there be rules that allow for some leveling in insurance costs? Why should I have to pay for that? In the end, though, you're going to end up paying for it. If somebody is not getting access to health care, whether it be preventative health care or standard treatments, in the end, that person's condition is probably going to worsen. And that person will not be able to work, may lose their home. And this can happen, by the way, to middle-class families, even upper-middle-class families. This has been known to happen. And eventually, we are going to pay for it one way or the other.
At last I remember, I think it's 500,000 people a year go bankrupt due to medical bills. But further on this, it's what you're saying. It's the same reason that we have public schools. Because you want to live in a country with educated people, because they'll do educated things and start businesses and be more productive. Mm-hmm. Same argument for healthcare. Why do you want everyone to have healthcare? Why do you want to subsidize it? Why do you want to make a single payer? Because if people are sick everywhere, there's less productivity. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember looking at a stat once of how much U.S. productivity is lost due to people being sick. It's an enormous number.
Agreed.
And so if you have a country full of sick people, you're going to have less productive, more expensive people. And going back to people like what Bernie would say is, or doctors even, that it's one thing to walk into a place when you have a cold and you can get treated for $50. It's another thing when you go into the emergency room is you couldn't pay for that treatment, and now you can't afford $10,000, so someone's going to pay for it.
And you're using the resources of emergency room staff, which could be better, allocated to people in serious traumatic conditions.
Right.
Well, thanks for that, and I will keep up to date on this particular issue, I'm certain. Moving on, last week we talked a little bit about what's going on with Amazon's proposed acquisition of Whole Foods. And I wanted to bring up, we just want a brief update on that. First of all, the acquisition is not final. It's not set in stone. It still has to go through approvals. There were rumors this week, I believe mainly started by analysts, that Walmart was considering an acquisition. However, yesterday Reuters reported that its sources were saying that Walmart is not at this time considering that acquisition. We'll see what happens there. There were a couple other interesting stories, though. People were asking, well, what does Amazon really have to gain with acquiring Whole Foods? One thing to consider is when companies acquire another business, we as consumers, we're seeing the front end.
Yeah.
We're not seeing all of the back end. And LA Times reports that by making this acquisition, Amazon would have distribution centers, cold storage distribution centers within 10 miles of 80% of the U.S. population. That is enormous connectivity with people all across the U.S., particularly in affluent markets, but not entirely in affluent markets, and would put them in a great position to start competing for grocery delivery services, which are very important. However, there was another story that kind of got buried, and that story is that Amazon applied for a patent on a technology that would effectively stop people who are in stores using a store's Wi-Fi from doing comparison shopping.
Really?
On their smartphones. Now, think about this. How did Amazon, do the disruption? Well, partly is people could go on to their smartphones or tablets when they were in a store, and they would do what's called showrooming. They would go in to look at the product, try out the product, then they would go look it up and see the price and either order it online and walk out of the store after getting their slimy mitts all over whatever they were touching, or they would call for a manager and say, can you do a price match? One way, Amazon gets the business. The other way, Amazon lowers the profitability of competitors. But now, Amazon wants a patent on something that would jam that process, essentially. It would not actually go into just anybody's cell phone if they were using their own connection. But if they are on that store's Wi-Fi, it could signal a store associate to come over and work with that person and try and persuade that person to buy something, or it could slow down that ability to look things up. So that came out, and a bunch of people started crying foul. Didn't see a whole lot of this story, but I think it's an interesting one that it's not just about Amazon at this point.
It's about who really is going shopping and then intentionally connecting to the Wi-Fi of the store.
There's actually an answer to that. So I know from personal experience, like for me, my phone, I have plenty of data package. I mean, it costs more, but a lot of people, especially we're going back to what is Amazon expanding their market to, people that don't have a lot of means. And so those are the people that can't afford a very strong or at all a data connection and are relegated to a Wi-Fi connection at a store. So if they have that connection in the store, you're really, I mean, it kind of, if you look at it that way, the target of this is people that already don't have a lot. Because if, again, I can go into an Amazon store, I have tons of data I can spend price comparing. So.
Yeah, and so this is going to be another interesting story, particularly if the whole food transaction moves forward and they have access to all of those additional physical stores.
It's getting some government oversight in this transition also, I hear.
Yes, that will definitely be happening. We'll see what happens there. Mm-hmm. Just briefly, also, an update on the London fire. There's a lot going on with that. And there is news that a luxury a condo complex, or block of flats, as they would say in the UK, they are opening up, I believe it's 67 of their flats, and will be giving those as permanent housing to people who lost their homes. There have also been tests on the flammability of this particular coating that was on the buildings. Many buildings in the UK have been shown to have this coating. It is not safe. In Camden, they actually had to evacuate a building. People were told, pack up and we're moving you out. So this is a very serious matter, and the UK is taking this seriously. It's unfortunate that 79 lives had to be lost in this.
Officially.
It
seems like it's more.
And the kind of trauma and displacement that also happens whenever this sort of thing happens. Trauma is something that can last for a long time.
Yeah, I would like to add, so this is another one of those circumstances where I really do hope that they are compensating these people for moving them out of their blocks. I don't think they are, because if you are someone that lives in those blocks, you can't miss a day of work. It's very similar to here in the U.S. You can't miss a day of work. Mm-hmm. Nothing can go off schedule. Everything has to be going right. And so if you're told by the government, hey, you got to move out right now, find housing, like that's an easy thing to do. Take your belongings, move out for a month because that's an easy thing to do. That will really disrupt a lot of these people's livelihoods, and I wonder how many people will be losing jobs because of, even though they're doing, again, for safety reasons to redo these buildings, it's still going to affect these people.
They need help. That's all they need. They need help, and we just can't hurt these people. I mean, what did they do wrong? They didn't do anything wrong, you know.
And Jeremy Corbyn's call to say, hey, we need to house these people right here in the neighborhood in these unoccupied mansions, essentially, that's a pretty fair and reasonable call. It's just, it has a lot of moving gears that's hard to implement.
Yeah, but at the same time, you still had that luxury condo block that not only let them stay in their spot, but they charged the government for it, but only at cost, which was, I don't remember the exact number, but it was far lower than the retail cost of those units. Yeah. They said, like, hey, they don't get concierge service or any of those nice amenities, but they get, if I saw some pictures of the rooms, they get a very nice apartment. Mm-hmm.
I want to say that they're going for, those flats are going for about $1 million each, and the cost is something like £150,000 million each. £150,000 is the cost, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So at least it's permanent housing, which I think is incredibly important.
I think it was a very generous offer that they were. I wish I knew the company off the top of my head so I could thank them, but they did. I do. In a time when this stuff doesn't happen, it's nice to see it happen.
It's good to see the working man and woman get a break after something that's understandably out of their control.
And important to keep them in the community with their community ties in the schools. We think about what happened with Hurricane Katrina here and how people were taken from New Orleans to Portland, Oregon. As far,
that's pretty nearby, right? It's like a couple miles.
I had a friend who had a contract to serve these people in Portland, Oregon, and he spoke about the trauma that these people were experiencing. These people were being dragged from pillar to post. And you wonder why some people become hostile. Well, you get treated like that. You've had this massive trauma, and then it's trauma on top of trauma for these folks.
Yeah.
So keeping them in their communities is so important.
Agreed.
100%.
It's but in a bigger picture. It's interesting. It's again, it takes deaths like these to make any action occur, and then when action occurs, it's usually a little too little, too late. But
all right, and everyone, this is Kit Cabello. I just want to gladly introduce our special call-in guest, Illinois State Senator Heather Steans. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first and foremost, I really want to give a big call out to your entire staff for coordinating with us to get this call in to happen. And basically, for our viewers, subscribers who are listening in, I just want to ask you a few questions in regards to Senate Bill 316 and to a lesser extent House Bill 2353, which is being supported by Representative Cassidy, and also in regards to cannabis legalization in the state of Illinois. So if you're ready, State Senator, I'm ready to ask you some of our questions.
Fire away.
All right. So this will be a three-part question. As we all know right now, there was a recent Southern Illinois University poll that showed that 2/3 of residents support legalization of cannabis. In the Illinois General Assembly, as you know, there are two bills, Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353, which are basically calling for the legalized possession of cannabis and allow businesses to sell cannabis products similar to the alcohol industry's model. So I know that right now both these bills are in standby in the Illinois State House and Senate, but what is needed for these two bills to pass in the chamber? Second, will there be bipartisan support for these bills? And thirdly, what has been the reception to both of these bills in Springfield?
Well, so what's needed to happen is to get to 30 votes in the Senate and 60 votes in the House. I mean, that's the way you got to pass a bill and then the governor to sign it. Mm-hmm. Every state that has legal adult use for cannabis right now got it through a referendum. No state has done it through legislatively passing it. Illinois is not a referendum state, so we do have to pass it legislatively, which I think creates a different and unique challenge compared to the other states that have legalized so far. Mm-hmm. Now, you would also ask what our plan is and what sort of the reception's been. We think right now that our reception has been generally positive. We've had without really trying to officially roll call the bill yet, we've had a number of people jump on as co-sponsors. I think ultimately we should get bipartisan support. We did for medical marijuana, as we have anytime we've been adding conditions for medical marijuana. And a lot of the cultivation centers and businesses associated right now with medical marijuana in Republican areas. And I don't see how this should be a partisan issue. That said, we don't have a Republican co-sponsor jumping on yet, but nor have we asked. We think this is a 2-year process, so we're really going to have to gather support for it.
A quick follow-up.
Yeah.
A quick follow-up in regard to that. Have you or Representative Cassidy called for anyone, let's say, for example, in the state of Colorado to vouch on behalf of the benefits of the legalization of cannabis within a state? Have you guys reached out to any of those states that have cannabis legalized?
Great question. We sure have. We had our first hearing in Chicago back in April between our joint appropriation hearings, the Senate appropriation hearing that committee I chair, and the committee that Representative Cassidy chairs in the House. And we had two people come and present at that hearing. The first was a woman by the name of Barbara Brohl, who runs the marijuana program in Colorado, to really learn from and be able to question her about the Colorado experience. We also then had the expert from the National Conference of State Legislators, their expert on marijuana issues, speak to our committees about what the experience across all the states that have been moving towards legalization. So we've been very intentionally want to be learning from other states' experience and build on that.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you mentioned medical cannabis because, as we all know, currently the Trump administration has recently stated that it's going to renew the federal war on drugs, with Jeff Sessions leading the charge, and impose harsher laws. Now, this is concerning as social acceptance of cannabis and cannabis products has improved drastically over the years, with the majority of Americans open to legalizing cannabis. So, if Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353 pass in Illinois, what is needed to protect the citizens' right to sell and purchase cannabis? And is there a plan to protect Illinois citizens and businesses from federal agency raids and interference as seen in California and Colorado?
Right. That's a terrific question. And one of the reasons why we aren't moving to try to pass this bill immediately. We want to see what this new administration does and how they're reacting in the states that have full legalization, so that we can learn from that and not put folks in a situation that's that's risky and not comfortable for folks. So we do very much intend to we are following very closely what they're going to do at the federal level regarding this, and I think can learn from that before we actually pass the bill. And it's also, you mentioned the poll of 2/3 of people in Illinois supporting it. It tends to be that legislators, politicians are a little more conservative and don't sort of evolve as quickly as the average population, unfortunately. So I don't think we have 2/3 of our legislators on board yet. So we've got to keep building that support.
And speaking of support, how many town halls have you done, especially in regards to working with your fellow co-sponsors for Senate Bill 316, for example, in the various other districts in the state of Illinois? How many have you done in regards to calling for cannabis legalization?
Well, we've done one official committee hearing. We're planning a second one, at least one more in the summer down in the one we had was in Chicago. We're doing another one in Springfield in summer, and we'll schedule more in the fall. We've done an open town hall in Chicago as well, which is a different format. We're doing another one in a different part of the state later this summer. And we're going to be working with our colleagues who, anytime or any place somebody would like us to come and speak to it, we are doing that and setting it up. We want this to be a very open and inclusive process, so anyone who has input and would like to be able to discuss the bill with us has an opportunity to do so.
Okay. Now, this is in regards to the recent election cycle that happened in 2016. During the 2016 presidential election, candidates like Bernie Sanders, Dr. Jill Stein, and Governor Gary Johnson all supported the legalization of cannabis and ending the war on drugs. And since the election, Democrat and Republican establishments have remained silent or stand against the growing majority of citizens that sided with the donations from private prisons, pharmaceutical companies, police unions, and liquor company lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Since there's a growing majority of Americans that are in favor of legalization of cannabis, what is needed to outperform the influence of lobbyists that would perhaps try and undermine Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353?
Legislators really do respond to outreach by their constituents. So people who support it should be reaching out to their state representatives and their state senators and letting them know that. That really makes an enormous difference in the way people view a bill and the way they are open-minded about listening to it and learning about it when they hear constituents supporting it. I don't know that people think that their voice really makes a difference, but it does. A state representative and a state senator don't hear from just average citizens on a topic that regularly. If you hear 10 to 12 people just call up and really give their opinion or come in to meet with you, you take notice. So you really can make a difference that way.
Okay. Now, in regards to a past event that happened before maybe all of us were born, prohibition in the 1930s, or similar to prohibition in the 1930s, the war on drugs has led to an increase in the construction of prisons and the ever-growing largest prison population on the planet here in the United States. Now, federally, cannabis is still deemed as a Schedule I substance, similar to methamphetamine and heroin, but what we see right now is that federal and local law enforcement agencies tend to primarily arrest African American and Latino males for possession of cannabis and other cannabis-related products. So, in your opinion, is the war on drugs a failure like prohibition? And is this current policy by police and federal agencies normally target low-income communities? Is that like a serious growing problem?
It is an enormous problem. You are absolutely correct. That's one of prohibition of cannabis just doesn't work. Same as prohibition of alcohol did not work. What we see in Illinois, it's about 7-1. It's about people who use cannabis about the same across various racial groups, but at least they get arrested 7-1 minorities over Caucasians for possession. That's just plain wrong. Representative Cassidy and I passed last session a bill that now at least creates civil offense for low-level possession of cannabis. It's not full legalization, but we have at least done civil offense for low-level possession to start really addressing that problem. It's an enormous issue.
Okay. And now in regards to local issues in regards to cannabis, there are many people who need medical cannabis to function properly, or some people who have certain disabilities, they need it to survive. Have you spoken to any groups that are pro-cannabis and really bring out the issues that if these people don't have cannabis as a medicine, they are going to suffer and perhaps be incapable of being part of our civil society?
Yes, and we have medical marijuana program in Illinois, as you know, but it's very tightly regulated, which is a good thing. I think people are thinking it's working well, but it also has limited access. Only about 12,000 people right now have medical cannabis cards, where we estimate about 750,000 people in the state of Illinois are using on an annual basis. So 98% of the cannabis industry right now in Illinois is the black market. That serves nobody well. It's not being regulated. You can't maintain or be assured of the quality of the product. People who do need it for medical reasons are still having a difficult time accessing it. And we have a cumbersome process to add diseases to the list that qualify for medical cannabis. So I do think going towards full legalization is a way of trying to get rid of the black market and give people easier access as needed.
And speaking of which, in regards to Springfield, has anyone from Governor Bruce Rauner's administration reached out to you or Representative Cassidy in regards to Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353? And if so, what has been their response or his administration's response?
We have not heard any official administrative response on this, so I don't know what that will be. I've had discussions with some individuals who work for the administration that have been personally supportive and helpful in how we're thinking it through. But we do not have an official administration response.
I understand. Now, 2018 is going to be coming around the corner, and a few of the candidates that we've interviewed governor candidates we've interviewed said that they're for cannabis legalization here in the state, most notably Democrat Senator candidate Daniel Biss, and as well as a few of the Libertarian candidates, and I think Alderman Pawar has also mentioned, as well as
J.B. Pritzker is as well.
Oh, J.B. Pritzker as well. Okay.
I do not believe that Chris Kennedy has come out saying he supports it yet, but I know that J.B. Pritzker has as well.
Have any of the Democratic candidates reached out to you or Representative Cassidy in regards to talking more about Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353?
Yes, I've had conversations with a number of them about it.
Oh, okay. Now, final question for our viewers and subscribers: where can they learn more about you and Representative Cassidy in regards to setting up town halls, and where can they find you guys on social media?
Yes, we entirely welcome opportunities to do that. So please do reach out. We each have Facebook pages. Mine is Heather Steans, Steans, Kelly Cassidy. Mm-hmm. We are both listed in the official Illinois General Assembly website, which is ilga.gov. Mm-hmm. So we try to be very, very accessible.
All right. Well, State Senator, thank you so much for joining Hard Lens Media. We're definitely looking forward to doing a follow-up and even speaking to Representative Cassidy when the opportunity comes. And hopefully there will be more updates in regards to Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353. Thank you very much for your time, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks a lot.
All right, guys. Well, what do you guys think of that interview? That was pretty good, right?
Well, it's good to see someone's fighting the good fight.
Yeah.
It is. It's good to hear about that and the real importance for so many people in Illinois, not only those individuals who need cannabis for medical reasons, but also let's try and reduce the number of people we initiate into the criminal justice system.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing to see the kind of support that this type of legislation has popularly, but not see the kind of action in either state government or federal government that goes in this direction. And Heather Steans is someone that is aligning with popular support and popular opinion, and that's really, really good to see.
I just want to add one quick final note. I found it very interesting that she said that the population has progressed, but a lot of the state's legislators have not, or fully not really understood that the population's mood towards cannabis legalization is changing. And, the people are always the ones who are in charge. The people lead. So all you have to do is call your local state senator and House representative and say, hey, I am for Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 2353. It can work.
And I want to add in that interesting that she mentioned very much what we've been saying the last few weeks. She said just get 10 or 12 people. That's all you really need to call in. And remember, because from their point of view, if one person calls in, about 100 people haven't called in.
Right.
So if they hear 12 people, they're really in their heads saying, oh, 1,200 people care about this.
Exactly.
So again,
Absolutely.
It doesn't take that much. If you organize with a few of your people in the neighborhood, if you're at a party or you're at a meeting, again, you just need like a handful of people that'll say, yeah, I will call in, I will call in, I will call in. And you might actually change your local representative's policy, which is a really great thing to do.
When the people lead, the leaders will follow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important. So it's up to you guys who are listening right now or going to listen to us online. Pick up the phone, find out who your state senator is, who your state representative is, call them and tell them to support 2353 and Senate Bill 316.
Yeah, I mean, it's how many people listening can call just 10 of their friends that live in the same area.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
And it can get done.
All right. Again, Kit, thank you so much for that great story. It's really important. Hope we'll be following up on that quite a bit.
Oh, we will.
Oh, great. We had another story that broke this week, very local, down in Pilsen. And Pilsen, as everybody knows, has been undergoing a lot of gentrification. And things really kind of came to a head this week when a building that was previously occupied by Casa Aztlan, a community center, was taken over by a developer for luxury condos. And the developer painted over the gorgeous murals with a gray primer. And making matters worse, the developer posted on social media about the project, took some pictures, and put the hashtag Making Chicago Great Again.
Oh.
Which did not sit well with many of the people living in Pilsen, who are recalling a similar catchphrase by a certain politician who made his career, who took off in many ways by insulting the people of Mexico, and certainly Mexican immigrants. This turned into a major kerfuffle. There was a demonstration outside. I saw some of it online. A friend of mine, she composed a beautiful poem in tribute to this building and these murals. The developer is now saying they're going to paint new murals up there, which makes me wonder.
Is it going to be like just white bread and like what's it going to be?
And that's what I'm wondering about. I mean, this was a mural about the struggles of people in that community, and now are they going to put something up that's
happy, manifest
happy.
destiny.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know what it is? It's gentrification at its finest right now. They're removing the culture. They're removing the landmark.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's been there since the 70s.
Yes. It has been there. And Pilsen is a community of incredible strength and resistance. I lived down there in 1999. And, my white body was down there probably helping with the gentrification. At the time, it was the housing that I needed at a price we could afford. But that is what happens in these systems, that people who are just looking for a place to live, you can become part of that system very quickly unless you're aware of what's going on. But this is what's happening. Pilsen has been gentrified for a long time. It has always been an amazing community. An amazing community for the arts, an amazing community for restaurants and culture, and it is being slowly taken over. We're seeing rents going up there, and local people may not be able to afford their rents anymore. Even homeowners, though, may be feeling the squeeze because taxes are going up. And if you've got somebody on a fixed income, well, it's true that seniors can sometimes apply for a tax variance. Some people may not have that option, or when they die and their family members inherit, those taxes could go back up. There's a bunch of things that can be happening that can help people to lose their homes. And then if they have a developer on them who is really close with the alderman, you can have situations where people can be hounded into selling their property, and then they're faced with the choice of having to resettle someplace else, even if they don't want to. So this is a very serious issue, and this developer who claims that he, did not support Donald Trump and apologized for his poor choice of hashtag, really stepped in it. But I got to tell you, this illustrates this kind of conflict and what's going on in that community.
It's just very sad because, like you said, from your point of view, it's like when you were looking for a place at one point, it was like, this is the cheapest thing. Is from Pilsen's point of view, if it's a very, very low-wage town, if you're, because we know the disparity between race and income, if you're Caucasian, and it becomes a very accessible place, and then it just kind of continues to drive the price up over time until all the original people are gone.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to talk more about this later when we talk about what's going on with Epic Burger, but it's systemic.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's definitely an issue. So what's this I'm hearing about car industry layoffs?
Yeah, so United Auto Worker layoffs continue and continue to spread, and we have just a new round of layoffs in companies like GM, Ford Motor Company. Basically, since the late in 2016, this is just a steady roll of more and more and more layoffs that it continue to burden working class people here in America.
Yeah, well, you have a lot of things. You have if you can get the labor cheaper overseas, you do that, and then the big thing that, as much as people want to talk about immigration overseas, the more silent but larger killer is just automation, and the fact that you can get a machine to do the work of 10 people, and that same machine you can now get to do the work of 50 people.
Yep, same thing with the coal mining industry. You're not going to send miners down there. They got machines, automatic machines now that can tear apart the mountain and do the job as 100 men, 200 men.
Instead of having a bunch of guys who live in the area who have been coal miners all their life, you just get one or two engineers who have gone to a good school and just have them run 10 pieces of machinery.
That's right. And more importantly, too, remember when Trump said he was going to protect these jobs and not have them sent overseas? Well, he still didn't protect them. They're still going overseas, and that factory is still being shut down, and the end result is people will still not have a job.
So this most recent round of firing is an announcement of 1,000 layoffs in GM's Fairfax assembly plant in Kansas City. So that's this specific round. Yep, this was announced just this past week.
My God.
Yeah, well, there you have it. I mean, it's, in a sense, we're talking about gentrification. Isn't this, in a sense, corporate gentrification, changing the environment of the culture, the laws, etc., to make it more comfortable for corporations to exist in it?
Well, here corporations have the seat at the table, banks have a seat at the table, Wall Street has a seat at the table. The only person who doesn't have a seat at the table in regards to our government and how it should work for the people are the American people. Yeah. I'm not seeing any of the union workers there. I'm not seeing private entrepreneurs there, small business owners. I'm not seeing average citizens anywhere in these big discussions. And the end result is, how are these people going to buy things? How are these people going to buy a home, a car, or send their kids off to college, or even worse case scenario, what if they have a serious medical issue, which we covered earlier? How are they going to pay for that?
Well, that's the interesting thing that no one talks about in this, is that the U.S. is a consumer economy, and we are depriving consumers of money.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's a death spiral that only needs the right amount of progress for a systemic collapse. Because if people aren't able to afford anything, you don't have a consumer economy.
It's like, weren't we past this? Didn't we realize this in the crash of '29?
Yeah, but those people are dead, and we're here now.
Right.
This kind of laying off of workers and depriving people of livable wage jobs is a side effect of capitalism at its core.
Neoliberalism, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, neoliberalism, corporatism, neoconservatism, call it what you will, but the end result is that it's if you're in the top 1%, you're going to be okay. But if you're in the bottom 99%, you're not okay. Even if you're in the middle class, that middle class water is shrinking away.
You know, it's interesting. There was a story that went viral this week. Somebody wrote an article, and I forget who they wrote it for, but it was Stop Pretending You're Not Rich. And it was about people who criticize the 1% while they themselves are making decent upper middle class wages, and talked about some of the differences in terms of class and money between the U.S. and the U.K. And I thought the author had some really good points, but the author didn't grasp that in the U.S. you can be making a very good salary. One serious medical event can wipe you out. And that it becomes, and particularly with the price of drugs being what they are, deductibles, and the fact that the insurance company can choose to deny treatment, and the fact that a person can lose their job eventually as a result of either having to provide care to an ill family member or a disabled family member, or because they themselves can no longer work, that a family that's making a lot of money, even if they have savings, even if they are being fiscally responsible, can still be wiped out.
And I would like to add on to that, the way that we treat lower class workers is actually spreading upwards. Again, it's the same kind of spiral. The same thing happens eventually to everyone except the people controlling it. So I know I was reading an article about this, somewhat recent, about the gaming industry and how the programmers and the game designers that make these games, even though they're making when they're working, they're making a very good salary. But, I mean, factor out that they have like a 6-month period where all they do is never see their family and work on the game. But the big thing is when the game finishes, they're now freelancers and have to go apply for a new job somewhere else. And generally that means you're moving your family with every single game you make.
Yep.
And then if you're working at that new job and you're in for 6 months and then suddenly they're like, hey, we're canceling this game, or we're going to downsize the production team, or we're going to outsource, which happens a lot as well in this industry, to somewhere else, then even these people, again, that are making what would normally be considered a very good salary, it's just as knife edge as people who are making less, although in that moment they're able to provide more for their family.
Yeah, and we've also, I put up some stuff this week on the Hardlands Media Facebook page about the gig economy. And the fact that we are progressively going more to freelance. I'm a freelancer myself. I think there's some folks here in this room who are also freelancers. And this is, I mean, your hourly wage, depending on how good you are, can be quite high. But you have to consider what you have to do to earn that, and that you're paying your own taxes. You're not going to be able to qualify for unemployment benefits, for example. It's a very precarious living, and the fact that as a freelancer, your invoice to your clients is treated like any other invoice. It is not payroll. That company goes out of business and files for bankruptcy. The bankruptcy court, first of all, is going to pay off payroll. That's important to bankruptcy courts. That makes a lot of sense. However, that company may owe me thousands of dollars, and yes, that can be the case. And I may never see that, because if that company it liquidates, the money may not be there to pay me.
But as they say, you got exposure.
I got exposure, yes. Okay, so there was a little additional news that did come in this week. Jerry Falwell Jr., president of Liberty University, son of Jerry Falwell, who back in the 1980s was a major force in the religious right, in the founding, in many ways, of the religious right. Jerry Falwell Jr. earlier was asked to head up an education task force put together by Donald Trump. He declined that offer, but he's now on another form of task force. And this is indicating to at least some of us a significant cozying up with Donald Trump to the religious right. What also happened this week is President Trump's attorney, Jay Sekulow, came out swinging, saying, saying some things about the president. And it came out that Jay Sekulow, who also got his start with the religious right back in the 80s on the 700 Club, is now working on behalf of Donald Trump. So we're actually seeing some very key players in the religious right very strongly connected with Trump and this administration. I find this interesting, mildly bewildering, because we're also seeing Trump with the Republican establishment, which has declined to take any particular action, even though they weren't crazy about his candidacy. But we're also seeing him hanging out with the religious right, which has cozied up with the Republican establishment, but has also sometimes been considered a nuisance by them. We're seeing that he's, there's this V going on here, and they're both connected to Trump. Falwell getting involved with national education policy, particularly on the higher education level. This can be serious. We're looking at the potential of losing some of the protections that students have, particularly in higher education, regarding discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, race, gender. These things can all be impacted by this decision.
So that's Title IX is really what you're talking about. And Jerry Falwell Jr. has come out and said that he thinks Title IX is an over-regulation, right? Yeah. That's the Republican right-wing talking point. Oh, there's too much regulation. And this is Title IX is some of the things that protect students who are victims of rape or sexual harassment. And a gutting of that is maybe not what's necessarily needed. It's not what I think is needed, but it's what Jerry Falwell Jr. is pushing for. And one can only speculate that he would fall in similar lines as someone like Betsy DeVos, and in support of charter schools and voucher programs, and ultimately, diminishing resources for any sort of public education.
This is conservative attack 101. They're going to go after people that they don't like, and now they finally have an administration, a Supreme Court, as well as a Congress, all in their control. Of course, they're going to gut these rights. Of course, they're going to come after them because it's just how they feel. They never lied about their position. The only depressing fact is that currently, right now, the Democrats don't have a leg to stand on to really combat these guys.
They don't have a position to lie about.
Yeah.
It does concern me moving into a society where there's no even pretension to offer a level playing field. Nobody is even attempting to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. And when you have charter schools where it's a lot easier to expel a child, and a child who has serious problems at home, and they cannot, they've been expelled, so these kids who are being expelled are going to the local public school, which is required to take them, and private and charter schools can keep the kids who have the most privileges. Mm-hmm. Who aren't sick. I mean, there are schools, charter schools, that cannot take children who have chronic medical conditions. And even though these kids may be academically gifted, but because they have diabetes or epilepsy or severe allergies, asthma, anything like that, those kids aren't going to be going to those schools. And the other thing, it's not just even the tax money in the public schools, but when you start draining off the committed parents who are doing, who are able to provide a lot of nurturance and financial support and be very involved in their children's lives, those parents are being pulled out of the public schools as well, and you're leaving people who are a population of students who are increasingly vulnerable. And then you can say, well, the school's not performing well. You see, public schools don't work. Isn't that convenient?
It's interesting in a sense. The way I'm thinking about it it sounds almost eugenics like.
Yeah. I think we're getting a theme on this show today, actually. We're talking about medical care. We're talking about, people being steered into prison for low-level marijuana offenses. There is a theme here going on.
And also another thing to point out, there's a shocking similarity between how the charter schools pick their students and how the private prison industry picks its prisoners. Because the private prison industry, what they do is they only want the most healthy, fit prisoners in their prisons, but they don't take anyone who has chronic illness or is sick or very old. I know they're two different things altogether, but charter schools only want healthy people who are academically gifted, and same thing too. Private prison industry only wants the healthiest prisoners.
Well, if you draw that to its conclusions, right? If you run a charter school and you selectively choose the students that you want to represent your school as the smartest, healthiest, highest achieving students, you get to then turn around, and when people say, do charter schools really work, you get to say, look how great our students are.
Yep.
And if you run a private prison and you say, I really only want the healthiest, strongest people to be in my prison, now I can put them to work in factory conditions and making things, the private prison industry, and pay them essentially slave wages, you get higher productivity out of it. We don't want old people and mentally unstable people. We want people who are going to be reliable workers.
We want people who get taken in for drug charges where they would not really be in the system otherwise.
Correct. Right. Relating back to our cannabis interview that we did.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting theme if you watch the news and you see, again, it's education. Oh, the rich should get it, but you shouldn't. Or, oh, only the best and brightest achievers should get a charter education. Everyone else should go into a public school system that we're siphoning money off of. Oh, healthcare is really nice, but you have to be rich enough to afford it and not worry about living on the knife's edge. I mean, all these things. In Pilsen, oh, you can live here, you just got to be increasingly rich.
Right.
And you deny somebody health care in their youth, and then they have health problems that get worse or exacerbated over time. And who are those people going to be? Well, they're going to be the people who are not necessarily going to qualify for the good jobs, who can't earn a lot of money, or who are denied the special perks of being in a private prison, or who are not getting into the charter school. So, in fact, there is a lot of connection between these issues.
I would even say if I make this into a family metaphor, it's like you have twins. You have one of the kids. You have money for two kids. You just put all that money for one kid. You take them places, get them to see the world, really open their horizons, make sure they have money for schooling, make sure they have good health care. Then the other kid, by the time they hit 6, you say, you better be earning your keep or we're kicking you out of this house.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So no one has a seat at the table, and again, it's just the system can just it only can last for so long till it collapses on its own weight. The fact that what people are forgetting, what a lot of these elected legislators are forgetting, is some of the greatest entrepreneurs, state and federal leaders, actors, actresses, content creators. A lot of them came from poor communities because they also went to public schools, and those schools were funded, and they were able to make something out of themselves, which is what we want in a great society. We were also able to build a strong middle class. But now that's slowly going away, what are we going to have? Some sort of feudal system where if you're rich and from a well-to-do family, only you are allowed to be educated, only you are allowed to be the leader, only you and your family name are only supposed to be the ones sitting on top?
That's where we're going.
That's the 99% can only take it for so long until they snap. And we've seen it numerous times in history. French Revolution, even the Bolshevik Revolution. We've seen it happen. So long as the rich control everything, absolute power, no responsibility, the people will snap back.
It's interesting. In a lot of ways, late capitalism, by definition, leads to a feudal system. Because if you separate the rich, because capitalism is all about siphoning from one to another. If you're, again, a Walmart employee, you make $14,000 a year, you get government food stamps, which everyone knows that the Walmart takes more money from food stamps and Medicare for low income than any other industry because they pay their people so little, so they actually outsource the costs of their laborers to us, and then they again pay them nothing. Meanwhile, each of those workers make about $80,000 a year for Walmart.
Right.
So you have then that rest of that money, so you have like $65,000, give or take. You factor out whatever inventory is, and then all of that per person goes to like a dozen people on a board. And so people wonder, hey, how can the Walton family, 5 people, have more money than the bottom 40% of the country? That's how. It's very simple. It's just siphoning over time. And again, that model, what is feudalism? Rich have everything. Everyone else is a tenant farmer that does what they say.
That can't last.
Mm. All right, well, we're going to go on a quick break here. We'll be back in the second hour. We've got another guest coming on the show, and we've got more stories to cover on the local level. And welcome back. We're going to have on the line with us Christopher Black, who is a...
Sir, how you doing?
Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Great. Christopher is a retired international criminal defense lawyer who's best known for his work in Yugoslavia in the 90s and also for his work in Rwanda. And he's here to talk a little bit today about current state of international law and current U.S. military actions in the Middle East. So, Chris, I have lots of questions.
Sure.
This week, the last 2 weeks, in fact, we've seen a lot of sort of escalating activities in Syria. We've got white phosphorus attacks in the city of Raqqa, appearing to be originated from the United States, aiding Kurdish rebels who are trying to create an autonomous stronghold in Raqqa. We've got military positions in southern Syria as well, and also shooting down of a Syrian aircraft, as well as buzzing Russian aircraft with a Russian diplomat on board. Do these actions constitute military aggression in a unilateral way? And what can the international criminal courts say about this or do about any of this?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And yes, the American and allied countries like Canada, Australia, and so on are committing aggression against Syria. That's quite clear. They put out all sorts of justifications and excuses to try and cover that over. But the fact is they've invaded Syria. They have no right to be there. And they're obviously assisting the ISIS terrorist forces, Deir el-Zor and other places, and therefore are complicit in all the atrocities that they're committing. They would be considered part of what the Americans at the international tribunals like to call a joint criminal enterprise, because they're not invited in by the Syrian government, which is defending its territory. They just invaded and gone in unilaterally. That's illegal, I think, probably under American law, because I do not believe there's been a declaration of war against Syria made by the Congress. And it's illegal under international law because it's a violation of the UN Charter, the Nuremberg Principles, and all the other international laws that you can cite.
That's
so
totally
all their
true.
actions in Syria are forms of aggression in one way or another. And the fact that they're using white phosphorus, which is a banned weapon and would be considered a war crime, and shooting down the Syrian jet was a direct act of aggression, but it's not the first, because they attacked, Trump launched 59 cruise missiles at the Syrian air base back in April. Mm-hmm. There was an attack on Syrian forces at Deir el-Zor again back in, I believe, September of 2016. So this is a continuation of their aggression and their invasion. They're trying to topple what they call a regime, which is what they call every government they want to lop the head off and replace with a puppet government.
What would you say to those that make the argument that U.S. military action in the region doesn't constitute action against a foreign nation state because we are, quote, fighting terrorism. And these areas in which we are occupying are terrorist-controlled, and therefore it isn't unilateral aggression. It's our war on terror.
Well, they can cover it. They can make up any story they want. I mean, it's laughable what they're saying. In that case, they can invade any country they wish, anywhere, anytime. If they declare that they're ISIS terrorists in Montreal or Toronto, they can invade Canada. That's what they're saying. It's just absurd. They cannot. The only organization which can authorize any military action anywhere in the world is the Security Council of the United Nations. Mm-hmm. And of course, because the Chinese and Russians will not approve any such action, they bypass it by making up these excuses and then forming what they call coalitions of allied countries like Canada who are under pressure to do whatever the American government tells them to do. So there's no justification possible under international law. They can say all these things till the cows come home. It doesn't make it legal. It's just laughable what they say. And the fact that the mass media keeps putting this out with straight faces from CNN to PBS is really shocking because then the media is part of the aggression. They become part of the propaganda machine which justifies this aggression. And at the Rwanda tribunal, there was a case of journalists who were indicted for war crimes for putting out information like that, false information like that, and are spending years in prison for doing so. And as for the question of what would happen, what international tribunal could do anything in reaction to this, there's none, because the American government has withdrawn from the International Criminal Court Treaty many years ago, and therefore is not under their jurisdiction. However, the prosecutor of the ICC could make public statements stating that this is all illegal, but she doesn't because she works for them, so that's a done deal.
Sort of a catch-22.
Well, the international tribunals, Yugoslavia, Rwanda, were all set up basically as show trial organizations to demonize targeted regimes, cover up what the West did in those wars, and justify those wars with the stories they put out. And the International Criminal Court has now been staffed by many of the same people from those organizations. That is American, Canadian, British, and many of them work for intelligence agencies. So they keep people in charge in the ICC, and they control it through that mechanism.
Mm-hmm. I'm also curious about your take on some of the NATO actions in the Baltic region. Obviously Canada is part of NATO as well, and
right.
recently there was a sort of a Canadian show of force in the Baltics, in Latvia, I believe, just a week ago.
Yeah, and Canadian forces are also being placed in Ukraine, and they're active in Syria and Iraq. There's a big story here in the paper, in the CBC today, that a Canadian soldier got 2 hits at 2 miles, or like the longest record for killing somebody by a sniper rifle. All these actions that Canada is taking part in and NATO generally are also illegal because they're in Canada's case, it's against the National Defense Act, which does not permit the government to deploy troops overseas except under certain conditions. That is a UN peacekeeping operation, a direct attack on NATO, a NATO country, which has not taken place, and that's about it. NATO has no right to go into Eastern Europe. That's a violation of the agreement they had with Gorbachev back in 1997, I believe. They agreed not to advance into Eastern Europe once the Red Army, the Soviet Army forces were pulled out. Mm-hmm. So the Russians they pulled out on that reliance, and then the Americans and the British arranged to take over and put NATO right up to the Russian borders, which is really direct threat against Russia. And we saw that with the buzzing of Shoigu, the Minister of Defense of Russia's jet the other day, where an F-16 flies up within meters of that plane. And that's really a dagger at the throat of the defense minister and the Russian people, because why would an F-16 approach a plane carrying the Minister of Defense except to threaten to shoot it down? Can you imagine if a Russian jet had approached the Secretary of Defense's plane within meters flying somewhere and had to be warned off by an American jet? You know what the American jet would have done. It would have blown it out of the sky. But this is assumed that the arrogance of the NATO powers is beyond belief, and it's been that way since the Soviet Union collapsed, basically.
It's sort of unbelievable, and I feel like there's been a lot happening very quickly. I feel like a lot of moves in just the last few weeks, and has a lot of people worried that we're just inching closer and closer toward full-out hot war in Syria. And it seems like Russia has a lot to do with that. That's where NATO has its sights set because of their alliance with Syria. Can you speak a little bit about that? Right.
It's clear that as soon as in my view, as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, the NATO, that is the Americans in particular, because they dominate NATO, it is their organization, decided to quickly use the advantage to try and take over control of the world. And they started that in two places immediately, one in Africa with Rwanda, and the tearing apart of Yugoslavia between 1991 and 1999. So they moved into Eastern Europe and the African continent very quickly, overthrew regimes there, and then have accelerated the expansion of NATO, or putting NATO up to the Russian borders, because Russia and China are the last remaining big powers which threaten American hegemony across the world. So Syria is important to Russia for several reasons. First of all, they have a small base there which they would like to use, and they can re-equip their ships patrolling the Mediterranean. They need something on the Mediterranean so they can take their ships through the Black Sea and out through the Mediterranean. Syria is an ally, and if they lose it, they lose prestige by being defeated, having an ally defeated. And thirdly, if America ever took control of Syria, we can see what they're trying to do. They will use that to build up forces to attack Iran over on a land bridge going through Iraq, because they can't attack Iran except by sea or through air forces, but there could be no land-based invasion from Saudi Arabia, for instance, would be very difficult. So that's why Iran's involved in all this. But the Russians have a lot at stake, and the Americans are pushing the Russians back into a corner they can't get out of. They've attacked their forces indirectly through their proxy forces. The Turks shot down a Russian plane that was probably done by American orders. That was last year. And their actions are accelerating as the ISIS forces are being degraded and destroyed by the Syrian, Russian, Iranian, and other forces. They seem to be desperately trying to support them in some way, especially right now in Deir ez-Zor in the east, where the Syrian forces have now moved in towards the Iraqi border to try and retake control of their borders. They have a base there at Deir ez-Zor, which has been under siege for about a year or more, or maybe more. And they're trying to break that siege, and the Americans look like they're trying to stop them from breaking that siege. Therefore, they're helping ISIS. So their claims that they shot down that plane because the Syrians were attacking so-called democratic forces working with them is false. They're directly assisting ISIS by shooting down that plane, because the Syrian plane was attacking ISIS positions. Mm-hmm. And all this is illegal and just complete outright aggression against Syria.
It's kind of insane, and we're all kind of wondering what happens next. I wanted to read real briefly. You were quoted in a Counterpunch article just the other day, and I thought this was a particularly good quote. You say, instead of peaceful and mutually respectful relations between nations, adherence to the fundamental principles of the peaceful resolution of conflicts and disagreements between nations set out in the UN Charter of the principles of the non-aligned movement, the world is faced with ultimatums, bribes, threats, and assault. Their brutality would be unimaginable if it was not so routine.
Right.
A quote just hit me between the eyes. It's like, wow.
Well, yeah, that's what's going on. It's just, you can call it, I mean, the Americans call it diplomacy and foreign policy, but it's just gangsterism. It's just pure, outright gangsterism. You have elites in charge of world governments, so in the NATO powers, Canada, my country's no different, committing illegal acts every day, attacking countries, tearing them apart. Look what they did to Libya, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Rwanda, Yugoslavia. And it's just done to destroy people who are in their way. and in a way of making money in all sorts of ways. So they just attack them, and if you don't submit, you get bombed. That's how the war in Yugoslavia started. It wasn't because President Milosevic was allegedly committing human rights abuses. That was only invented after the fact, after the Americans presented a diktat to the Yugoslav government, allow us to occupy your country and convert immediately from socialism to capitalism, or we're going to bomb you. And they naturally said no. Then they were attacked. Then the stories were invented to justify that attack for the American people, because most people are good people. They don't want to fight anybody or kill anybody. You have to fire them up and convince them that the people you're attacking are bad. And that's what all the propaganda is for. And now we have this unbelievable, outside the United States, we're looking at what's going on in the United States it's just bizarre that they're claiming the Russians have the power and the skills to somehow manipulate the American people into voting for, say, Donald Trump, which is insulting to all the people that voted for Donald Trump, I'm sure. But it's just bizarre that the amount of propaganda, but the whole purpose of, it seems to me, the propaganda about Donald Trump and General Flynn and so on being Russian agents is to convince the American people that the Russians are a direct threat, and therefore to justify a bigger war. Mm-hmm. That can only be the only logical conclusion. It's very dangerous, and it's the action of mafia dons. There's no difference.
It's been the same. You mentioned in Iraq. You mentioned in Libya. You mentioned all the way back in Yugoslavia. This is a repeating pattern of the United States claiming that foreign powers.
I can even go back. Even go back to Rwanda. Bill Clinton's big lie about Rwanda. The United States did nothing in Rwanda. And therefore, as Rwanda is often used as an excuse to justify humanitarian interventions worldwide. Look what we didn't do in Rwanda, and look what will happen if we don't intervene. Well, the American forces were directly involved in Rwanda. What most people don't know is the American Air Force and soldiers were on the ground in Rwanda, and they were fighting for the rebels, so-called, who invaded from Uganda to overthrow the socialist government in Rwanda. And they put out all sorts of stories about that. But it's a big lie that Samantha Power and Bill Clinton put out, that the United States did nothing in Rwanda. They controlled the entire war. In fact, Boutros Ghali said in 2004 that the Americans are 100% responsible for what happened in Rwanda. But these lies are put out, and the mainstream media puts them out, and you can say what you want, but that's what most people are told to believe.
That's kind of incredible. Can you speak a little bit also about Milosevic in Yugoslavia? Does that follow a similar pattern?
Yes, because the Germans, United States, the Germans and French, United States, and the British deliberately broke up in various ways the Republic of Yugoslavia, which was one of the founding members of the non-aligned movement, and one of the remaining working socialist countries in Europe. They deliberately pulled away the different republics for all sorts of mechanisms too long to talk about now. And then when it was left with Serbia, Macedonia, and Montenegro as Yugoslavia, the rump Yugoslavia, Madeleine Albright presented a diktat to Milosevic that you have to surrender and allow the complete occupation of the country by NATO troops, and you're going to convert from socialism to private enterprise system now, or we're going to bomb you. And Milosevic refused, and they bombed. Now, the end of the war came in June of 1999 only because the American forces and the NATO forces bombing Yugoslavia caused a lot of destruction, but they didn't touch the Yugoslav military forces much at all. And they were still quite capable of putting up a lot of resistance. The only way they overcame that was to send two emissaries to Milosevic, Chernomyrdin, who was Yeltsin's foreign minister at that point, and a guy named Ahtisaari from Finland, who won the Nobel Peace Prize a year or two ago. And they came with a message from the Americans and met with Milosevic and several officials who I've spoken to, and they all confirmed this story, that they met with him and said, you have to surrender, or the Americans promised to carpet bomb Belgrade with B-52s at high altitude. You can't touch them. And they intend to kill 500,000 people, and they're going to level the city unless you surrender. That was the diktat. So Milosevic took that to the parliament. This is what we face. Do we carry on the war resisting, or do we give up? And they decided to give up. And that's how NATO won that war, through the threat of mass murder. Yeah.
So given this...
And then, of course, Milosevic was arrested and shanghaied and taken off to the tribunal at The Hague, and then murdered there, we believe.
Yeah, he eventually died while in captivity during the hearings, and there's some speculation that it was not of natural causes.
No, we found he wrote a letter to the Russians just a few days before he died. Said he believed he was being poisoned, and even from the ICTY's own report, they found there were 2 drugs in his body which shouldn't have been there, and nobody can explain how they got there. And the entire circumstances of his death are very suspicious. So my personal belief is that he was murdered and poisoned. And the reason being that his trial was supposed to be the trial of the century, but as soon as it began, it fell apart because there was no evidence that he did any of the things they alleged. And yet they could not acquit him or allow him to be released because he's a big political figure. He would go back into Yugoslav politics and be a rallying point for anti-NATO movements, and so he had to be eliminated. And that's what they did.
Given this pattern, I kind of want to bring things back, circle back to current events, and I know we'll get into speculative territory, but given this observed pattern we see of NATO-aligned countries and maligning other countries for this gangsterism, as you put it, what do you expect will be the outcomes in Syria, in the Middle East in general, as we see a rejiggering of alliances with ties being cut from Sunni nations between Qatar and the rest of the Sunni nations, and this increased aggression that we see over the last few weeks?
Well, it's hard to say exactly how it's going to pan out because the Russians are being very patient in the face of all these provocations. They've said several times, don't go near our people or the Syrian forces will do something, but they haven't done anything yet. But their fear is always to avoid a bigger war. I mean, I was in Moscow 2011 when NATO was destroying Libya, and the mood was very, very depressed because I talked to some Putin advisors, and their thinking was, they told me they think the American elite, government elite, are completely irrational, and that they're capable of launching a nuclear strike against Russia whenever they feel like it. And that's their big fear in Russia, that the American ruling class are completely irrational and willing to take these risks. So they told me, you're going to see Russia bending over, weaving and dodging and not being as tough as you would like us to be, but we're trying to avoid a nuclear war. And that's our main concern. So that's always in their minds, do what they do in the face of American provocation by shooting down Russian Syrian jets. If they shoot down a Russian jet, is Russia going to retaliate and shoot down several American jets? Where does that go? But it's very, very dangerous because at some point the Russians will have to, if they're pushed into a corner, they will fight back. And when they fight back, the American and NATO and other forces are going to be shocked. Their capabilities are quite high. But that's why I had Putin with Oliver Stone's interview saying if World War happens, nobody's going to survive it. I mean, the fact that we're talking this way, the world leaders are saying we have to avoid nuclear war means that they're thinking once possible, which is very, very, I mean, it's just, it's almost surreal to say we're talking like that these days.
I've heard some people say that we are as close as we've ever been to nuclear war, even as close as we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you think that that's possibly true?
Yeah, I remember the Cuban. I'm old enough to remember that. I was a teenager then. That was very, very worrying because we feared there could be a nuclear war starting at any second. It was a terrible time, but it's building to a situation now where it's almost as bad. It may be worse because now Russia is directly threatened by NATO forces right on its border, which themselves are very small and not really a conventional threat. The Russian army could deal with them quite quickly, but they're they could be used as a trigger force. That is, something will be done, and the Russians will be accused of doing it, and then some people will be killed, and then there will be a war. That's what I worry about. It could be anywhere from Kaliningrad up in the north near Estonia down to the Ukraine and Donbass republics in Ukraine, or something happening in Syria. But the situation is very, very dangerous. Then you have the situation with China. I mean, the American Navy is pushing against the Chinese national territory almost every day with their ships sailing through Chinese territory, and the Chinese warning them, you better stop it or else.
You're talking about the island disputes in southeast China, right?
Yeah, South China Sea, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now we have Iran firing its missiles into Syria, showing what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
So it is escalating very quickly, and I don't see anything good coming out of any of this. But it's very worrying how it's actually going to play out. I can only hope it stays on a lower level, but it could quickly jump into something else.
So we're watching these stories pretty closely, and we're kind of scratching our heads wondering what's going to happen. I know that's a term I use like every week now.
Yeah, it's hard to say how it's exactly going to play out, because we don't have enough information. We're looking at shadows in the cave wall. I mean, the Pentagon and whoever controls America these days, they know what they're planning. Mm-hmm. The Russians know what they're planning in response, but we don't. I mean, we're just members of the public. We can speculate on what we observe, but that's all we know. We don't know exactly what's going on. But what is going on, what we can see going on, is extremely dangerous, and it looks like the people that control the NATO governments are willing to destroy countries and murder thousands of people whenever they feel they can get away with it. And unless the Russians and Syrians push back against the American invasion of Syria, they will keep pushing them. And how long that can go on before something explodes is hard to say. Mm-hmm. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen next month. But it's not getting better. That's for sure.
I'm reminded of the quote: "The first casualty of war is the truth."
Right, yeah. And the mass media in our countries has a lot to answer for, because these people are lying to the people every day, and they're getting paid to do it. How they can live with themselves at night, I do not know. But I watch I can watch the CBC up here, or the private news networks. I watch CNN, and I watch even the PBS, and watch Judy Woodruff and all these people putting out the same lies day after day after day with a straight face, and not asking the right questions like you're asking. I'm very glad that there are media which are independent, which can ask the right questions still.
We're trying.
It's a very, very brave thing to do these days.
All right. Well, Chris, we're going to be wrapping up this segment. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you online? I'm on Facebook, but I have a blog. It's called Christopher.black.com, where I have some of my other works, but you can find some of my articles there. Otherwise, I write a lot for New Eastern Outlook. You can find some of my articles about politics on New Eastern Outlook and Counterpunch and Global Research and places like that from time to time. Yeah, New Eastern Outlook, let me see, is journal-neo.org.
Correct. I believe so, yes.
All right. And it's ChristopherBlack.com, is that right?
Christopher, I think it's Christopher.black.com, or Christopher-Black.
It looks like it's dash. Christopher-Black.
Right, okay.
There we go.
Before he goes, Christopher, this is Daniel. I'd like to ask one question. We've been talking about it a lot last week, but the situation that's happening in Qatar between the rest of the Middle Eastern bloc, what's your take on that?
That seems to be, again, some sort of pressure they're putting on Iran, that because Qatar has friendly connections with Iran, and Al Jazeera has been used to put forward some of the Iranian positions. They're trying to pressure Qatar and giving all that up. But that's very murky. It's very complex because the Americans have a big base there and they have a lot of influence in Qatar. And yet Donald Trump was talking to the Saudis just a few weeks before that this all blew up. So what actually is going on there. Somebody must have made a decision when Trump was there. Look, we want you to put pressure on Qatar to shut down Al Jazeera and stop promoting the Iranian position. And of course, the Americans are there. The American base is very big there. It's used to conduct a war in Afghanistan. So America has a big role in protecting Qatar. On the other hand, the Turks do too. So it's hard to say exactly what is going on there either, because we don't have all the information about why this is taking place right now.
What's your take on them? Just very recently, obviously they sold a huge amount of arms to Saudi Arabia, but then also selling arms to Qatar. Is that just, hey, we're just doing a Maxim machine gun, sell to both sides of the war, or is there something else to that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is, to keep the Saudis going in their war with Yemen, which the Americans are backing, your government's backing. No, obviously also to make a lot of money. So the Americans sell them all these weapons. They get all these Saudi dollars. They cut petrodollars back into the American economy, which helps finance the war machine to keep going, of course.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to make some shareholders a lot of equity.
Well, that's what they've done. Some people are obviously getting rich from all this, and it's being paid for by taxpayers' money. I mean, the American taxpayer is paying for all those weapons.
Close to 50% of our income tax goes to war.
Right. So now you've just dumped it on the Saudis, and they paid. Now you've been basically the weapons are being paid for twice. The American taxpayers paid for them. Now they're being resold to the Saudis, and the American elite is collecting all those hundreds of billions of dollars back. It's a real racket. Canada does the same thing. We're a large exporter of arms all over the world. The same thing goes on.
This is the current state of affairs in the world. We'll be continuing to watch this very closely. Christopher Black, thank you very much for being on the show with us today and tackling some of these very, very difficult and confusing issues.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic insight, and especially
Fascinating.
in our current affairs.
It's always like I can either take that and be terrified or get a little excited because I only have two choices, really, and I'm going to make sure we fight this.
Hey, we got to do what we have to do to support the military-industrial complex and how it's crippling our relations across the world.
Or it's making them great with gun points.
Yes, that's true.
So let's move from the international to the local.
Well, it may not be as local as it appears. This week, I was going through the news stories, as I typically do, and I found a little article in Crane's Chicago Business, a local burger chain, Epic Burger, that our own Kit Cabello has been to and liked their burgers very much, I believe.
I will speak on their behalf. Look, we're not sponsored by them at all, but they're a very good burger. I've been there a few times.
Yeah.
Would you say it's epic?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Okay.
They have are moving to, or actually they have moved to a cashless system. They are no longer accepting cash at any of their 8 stores. And this has been going on with some retail businesses for a while. Our local tea shop chain, Argo Tea, Sweetgrass, which is, I think, an East Coast chain that has just come to Chicago, has done the same thing. And as the headline on the Crane Chicago Business article says, your money's no good here. Your cash is not good at these stores. So it was an interesting story to me, just about evolution of retail and technology. But then I started poking around a little bit. I put the article up over on Hardlands Media page. I shared it over to my personal Facebook page. My friends are a pretty live bunch. And they started in on it, and they started asking a lot of questions. Well, wait a minute. Doesn't cash say it's legal tender for all debts, public and private? And then people started asking a lot more about the questions, a lot of questions about what happens to people who don't have credit cards, who don't have debit cards, who are among the unbanked. And it just kind of evolved, and I started looking into this story, and there's a lot going on here. And actually, I did find that the media, mainstream media, has been looking at this for a while. But just to start, first of all, the question, is this legal? Yes, it is. In fact, we've been seeing this for years. A lot of retail stores won't accept bills over $20, even though they say this is legal tender. There are businesses, insurance businesses, landlords who will not accept payment in cash. You have to use some kind of instrument, whether it be a credit card, a debit card, money order, or a check. And in fact, I did check out the website of the U.S. Treasury, treasury.gov, and I did find out that there is no law, no federal law, that requires a private business to accept cash for anything. So that right away, I looked into that. Now, I did find out that, at least in a story in the Boston Globe, indicated that Massachusetts law, it's more murky, whether the state law would prohibit this sort of thing. But if you think about it, I don't see state legislators getting too up in arms about this because, after all, if all transactions are electronic, it's a lot easier to track the business for tax purposes and that sort of thing. So right there does not seem to be a legal issue here with a private business. The second question that kept on getting brought up is what happens to people who don't have a debit card or a credit card, who can't use a mobile pay system, for example, because they don't have an electronic way of transferring funds. I want to get back to that, but I first want to talk about the issue of data collection. That when you pay for something electronically, whether through a mobile pay service, a smartphone wallet, credit or debit card, there's electronic transaction there. There's data there. And that data can be sold. It can be sold to insurance companies. Hey, we're noticing you're getting that extra bacon on your burgers. Well, we got to look at those life insurance rates or those health insurance rates. Hey, we see that you bought a couple pitchers of beer and you had an accident a little bit after that. Maybe you've been drinking and driving. I mean,
there's one that's you looked at an AA meeting. Your life insurance premiums just doubled.
Yeah. So again, when you have common, ordinary, everyday purchases, that data can be used obviously to sell you things. We know that on social media, that they're looking at your browser history and they're targeting you with ads and stories. But there are other entities that could get this information and make use of it. So I would just point that out. The second thing that I want to point out is that there are a lot of people who have good reason to only want to use cash. And these aren't people who are trying to avoid anything. They don't have any nefarious purpose there. They're not trying to avoid law enforcement tracking them down. But there are people, for example, who have been the victims of identity theft. And they have good reason to want to use cash for transactions because the more they use their credit cards or their debit cards or their banking accounts, the more vulnerable they are to having their identities stolen again. There are domestic violence and stalking victims who really would prefer to have a cash existence, cash and money order existence, because it makes it that much more difficult for the person who's tormenting them to come after them. Also, financial counselors will often recommend what's called a cash fast for people who have trouble with budgeting and overspending. And the idea is, don't use a card, because when you use a card to pay for things, you are disconnected from the money that you actually have. So there are some very good reasons why people may prefer to use cash. Although I'm going to go back and say legally, these private businesses are well within their rights to do this. But then we come down to another question, and that is, okay, obviously these businesses have run the numbers, and they've decided this is a good business decision, even though it may create ill will. They may be turning away very legitimate business from folks. What is the purpose here? Just to make things easier for the business, which I understand, to protect the business against what Epic Burger's spokesperson said were low-class problems like theft and security issues? Or are they trying potentially to keep people out of their businesses, people who, again, are not going to have access to cards? There are a lot of people in the U.S. who do not have bank accounts. If they may have prepaid debit cards, but those have fees attached. There are people who work for cash in the U.S. There are a lot of people who are still working for cash in the U.S. All of these people may be discouraged from entering into these businesses. And again, we can say, well, private business, they have that right. But are we moving toward a situation where we have a two-tier business system, where the people who are able to pay electronically are in a position where, they can visit any business versus businesses that will still accommodate the cash customer? Curiously, of course, as I brought up last week, both Walmart and Amazon have made it easy for people who need to pay cash to shop online with them. They have programs for paying cash in store or paying cash at a local retailer. But some of these businesses are perhaps moving to a system where those cash customers would be excluded. So these are just some of the issues that came up. The other issues that came up is the wider issue of being unbanked. How much more excluded are people who are unbanked going to be? Many people are unbanked because they can't get a government-issued ID. And by the way, those folks are having a harder time voting in many states right now, so you have voter suppression. So we're looking at issues here of, are we seeing further stratification, class stratification? What is going on with data? Why do companies want data so much? And the broader implications of people who are going to be permanently marginalized because they cannot get an ID, they cannot get a bank account, and they can't even vote. We got a lot going on here.
I agree 100%. I mean, well done covering that story, Lainey. Yeah. It really shows that there's a huge gentrification that's happening, especially here in Chicago on the south side and west side communities. And just for a side note, the one Epic Burger that I would visit the most would be the one by Roosevelt. And I remember 10 years ago, 12 years ago, that neighborhood was a little different, but now I'm noticing it's becoming a little bit more upscale. There's more small businesses. It's starting to become a little bit more safer, I guess, if you want to say that. But I'm noticing that the people there who've lived there for a long time are moving out, and new people are coming in.
I just want to say, just as a separate but very relevant, I don't, just for many reasons, I don't have a credit card. I don't like what they stand for. It's just a pointless way of using money, in my opinion. I have a debit card that's tied to my bank account, and because of that, I have no credit score.
Yes,
so
exactly.
So if I ever want to buy something that's large, I have to find someone who's willing to put their name beside mine on a statement, because I'm not borrowing enough money to show that I'm safe with money.
And you're going to have to, I can just tell you, if you did decide you wanted to get a mortgage or something along those lines and you couldn't find a co-signer, and co-signing is a very risky proposition, right. I want to point out to folks. In fact, banks call co-signers fools with fountain pens because of the possible consequences of this. But you would probably have to spend somewhere around 24 months trying to build credit before you could do that, because of the way credit scoring works in the U.S.
And even that, credit scoring, 1 in 10 credit scores have a major error, 1 in 4 have a minor error.
Well, it's not even that. There isn't just one credit score.
There
three,
are
multiple,
and then there's the bank side.
There are multiple credit scores, and credit guarantors, credit grantors, are not required to use just one. They can pick which credit score they wish to use.
But besides that, no, the ones that banks and similar use, they actually don't use those credit scores. Yeah. They use a different version of those companies' scores that as a consumer you can't see. So you can have a FICO credit score and it's X, and you can have the bank looking at that same score and it's a different number because of things that I can't see. And you have to actually sue these companies most of the time to even get them to change the smallest infractions.
Absolutely. Right. And so as you point out, unless you decided that you wanted to take steps to enter into the credit score, you would have to take some real time and effort. And at this point, there could be businesses up and down all the way around Chicago where you would have a difficult time making a purchase.
Let's just to speak on the divide when it comes to credit scores. Out of curiosity, I just looked at mine real quick on Credit Karma, which is no sponsorship or anything, but I was curious. And I won't say what mine is, but I will say between the credit scores that got on here, there was about a 40-point difference between some of them, which is a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that is honestly, it's a decision-altering difference right there. Someone would look at that difference, see that right there, and they could turn me down just for that.
Absolutely. I'll give you a story. I was working in this is about 10, 15, even more years ago. I was working in customer service for a magazine company. A lady called in and said, my husband and I are trying to buy a house. We have no credit score. We've always paid cash for everything. And our banker said, can we get letters from people who we've paid money to over the years? Can we get a letter from you guys saying we've always paid our subscription on time? This was a $20 magazine subscription. And this poor lady probably thought she and her husband were doing the right thing. They were trying to be honorable people, doing the right thing, and they had really messed themselves up. So there's definitely that. And then I bring in the issue of identity theft, which can total somebody's credit score. It has landed people in jail. Because they've mistaken identity for somebody who has a warrant. It has also resulted in hampered medical care because people will use medical identity theft. People who are seeking drugs will go into ERs. They get put into a database, or there's information that's charged to a person's health insurance. The hospital gets this information, and they treat the victim of medical identity theft as a drug seeker. And again, so these people may not want to be using cards, particularly for incidental purposes like tea and burgers. And they're going to have a harder time doing this. Again, I can understand the business end of things if they've decided this is what's going to work for them, but there are far-ranging implications as we talk about, as we're seeing a society that's becoming increasingly stratified. What's going to happen? Who is going to be in these establishments, and who is not going to be in these establishments?
I want to take it to the other side of the equation, not the people who are finding themselves unable to pay with cash anymore, but what does it mean as businesses basically encourage and force people to get bank accounts, that get credit cards, people that operated cash only before. I want to go back and remember, where does wealth and money creation happen in this country? A lot of people will point to the interaction between the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, printing money. And that accounts for something like 3.5–4% of all money creation. Where most of the money is created is in the banking system. When you bring $100 into the bank, you did a job. Let's say you're a freelancer. You did a job, you got $100, you bring it to the bank and you deposit it in the bank. That bank is required to hold, in some cases, only 10% of that in reserve. And what are they going to do? They're going to take the other $90 and they're going to loan it out to somebody that's going to go do something. They're going to go buy a car, they're going to go buy a home, they're going to go buy a boat, whatever it is. Whoever sold them that car, that boat, that home is going to take that money back to a bank. And now 90% of that is going to get loaned out again. And then that money is going to come back to a bank. And then 90% of that is going to get loaned out again. And then so on and so on and so on. So your $100 that you initially put, your $100 real dollars of real money that you really worked for, ends up multiplying through this system by which it keeps getting loaned out. And what we have now is a system where this fiat currency system that we have is really numbers on ledger sheets, numbers in computers. And we come back to you look at your bill that says this note is legal for all debts, public and private, and we look at the rules in the U.S. Treasury, and turns out that's half true at best. And that this wealth creation, this is a way of forcing people into a system whereby the people who are watching numbers, are the ones that are the winners, not the people who are working. And Thomas Piketty talked about this in his book, Capital in the 21st Century, that we've reached a point where no amount of entrepreneurship, no amount of labor, no amount of work can produce as much wealth as pre-existing wealth.
Right. Absolutely. And I would also point out that the banking system itself has become two-tiered in many ways, because you'll have your full-service banks where if you have an account for a long period of time, it's easier perhaps to get loans, mortgages, whether you need an emergency loan, home equity loan, car loan. But there are also now essentially debit card companies that are offering many of the services of the bank, like you can have a direct deposit to your debit card, but they don't offer the kind of full scope of banking services that a bank or a credit union might offer. But many people who are in poverty only qualify for debit cards. So, that's what's going on right now, and it's a big story, and we're gonna keep our eyes on it.
You can still use your cash at M-Burger.
If I could just make one final note, it's a little comedic, but I would treat myself to Epic Burger for like a reward or when I'm feeling in a good mood, and 100% of the time, I would always pay in cash.
Oh dear!
Looks like they just lost a customer.
Well,
Are you listening, Epic Burger?
All right.
I had a whole routine.
This is one heck of a show. Thanks everybody here for their participation. I want to remind everybody you can always tune in at 11 a.m. Central at 1680 a.m. in Chicago, q4radio.org. You can also tune in on iTunes Radio, TuneIn Radio on your smartphones. So thank you so much for joining us. Also remind everybody we are on social media. You can look us up, Hard Lens Media, on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram.
And YouTube.
And YouTube, absolutely on YouTube. And we really appreciate your support. Please consider sharing our links, liking our pages, following us. That's the bread and butter of independent media, folks. All right. I want to thank everybody again. Have a great weekend. See you next week.